What does a financial advisor even do? Well, before I can answer that, we got to think about what type of advisors are there. So you've got insurance, you've got mortgage, and you've got investment planning. So the insurance advisor, where they add value is, they could be underwriters. So they could find policies that are more tailored and personalized to you, that could be more cost effective and have a better success rate in terms of claiming. And they also assess the different providers there across it a lot. And then you got to think about how do they get paid, what's their motive, and are they giving good advice? But really it just solves the problem. It's convenience. You could go to a comparison website, look at what one's the cheapest, which ones has the features that you want, but there are important considerations like claim rate, the underlying provider, also having someone that understands your situation, because you don't know what you don't know. For example, you're a business owner. You might not think you need life insurance because you have no kids, but what you can get is key personnel insurance, where you're looking after the key people inside your business. If you lose one of them, you're a bit stuffed. You might not have thought of that. You might know that. You might be knowledgeable. You might not need someone. But that's what insurance providers do, is they look at the big picture, they compare the underlying providers, and they have the potential to have some level of customization for the type of insurance. Second one, mortgages. Do you need a mortgage broker? The challenge is most businesses, they need someone to actually bring in business, and they're willing to pay a fee to make sure that person does that. And what a mortgage broker does is essentially they bring businesses to banks or non-bank lenders, and they can look at the big picture thing. And I think a lot of people I come across, they have mortgages, they don't necessarily have the right type of mortgage. Which provider provides it for you isn't too important, but there are certain discounts and certain things you can capitalize on what a mortgage broker will help you think about. But really what they're doing is they're coming across a huge amount of approvals. They're looking at what's failing, what's working, how do you get it over the line. And they're also seeing their clients going good and going badly, so they can give an overarching view around mortgages. So it's just a specialist understanding, and then also think about the right kind of product for you. Whereas the banks, their best interest is to make sure that you pay interest for as long as you can, whereas a mortgage broker is incentivized to get you to get a mortgage. But that's not to say they won't help you pick the right type of mortgage or the right type of provider that's going to deliver that mortgage. Now, investment, mainly what they do, there are some ones that do brokerage and some that give class advice, which is kind of saying like, hey, you're between 20 and 30, you're a male, this is what people between 20 and 30 that are males usually do with their investment. Helpful. That's not so much helpful. But the investment side of things is the biggest problem they solve is either people worrying about their first home, how the hell will I get a deposit? Maybe if I use KiwiSaver and manage funds to achieve that objective, it will help. But the most common narrative around investment planning is eventually your income will stop. Where will that money come from? And that's what an investment advisor does. They might help with the rental property side of things. They might go down managed funds. They might use index funds. But the whole goal is they're trying to solve the problem of funding your income in retirement. Now, there are 50 to 100 financial planners. It's still a financial advisor, but they just have a bit of a holistic approach. Get the insurance, the structure, the strategy. So structure might be estate planning. It might be wills. It might be the big picture of like, hey, should you structure your business in this way? I actually know you could be in a bad position. Have you thought about this? So it's just someone that looks at the big picture, pulls together a plan and solves those issues. But for the most part, what investment advisors will do is make recommendations on how to fund your income in retirement. Now that's question one. What do they do? Question two is how in the hell do they get paid? Well, insurance providers, they get paid by the provider. So you always got to look, when you get a disclosure statement, they're required for you to see that. You'll see how they're paid. So if they make a recommendation where they're getting paid more than they might for a different recommendation, then you got to ask the question, are they recommending it because it's fit for purpose, or are they recommending it because they make more money? Usually not, but if you understand the disclosure statements, how they're getting paid, you can ask the question saying, hey, what led you to make that recommendation? So for the most part, insurance advisors, there's no cost. The cost comes in the form of the commission that they get from the provider, and you always got to make sure that their motive is sound. Same thing with mortgage brokers. For the most part, mortgage brokers either make their money from banks or non-bank lenders. So they usually get either an upfront commission or they have some small trail along the way. But most of their business is derived from their ability to write new business, so you really need to look for the attributes of someone that's going to be there in the long run, has the good value set to support you. Same thing with insurance brokers. Sure, they make a bit of trail, but the biggest amount of money they get is from writing new business because the providers that they use are trying to incentivize that. Something to be mindful of. Now, investment advisors, usually what they do is they either charge a consultancy fee, either that's a plan writing fee or to set up the investment. It ranges between $250 and $4,000, but a lot of the standard out there is actually they don't charge a fee, and the fee that they charge is for ongoing. They charge usually about 1% tax deductible. So if you've got $1 million, it's $10,000 a year. If you've got $10,000, it's not much for the advisor. So usually what they got to do is they have some level of qualification or criteria, and usually target people that are older that can invest a larger amount. They make their money on the ongoing, which means it's harder for them to service young people unless they charge that one-off consultancy fee. Question 3, is paying a financial advisor worth it? Sometimes no, sometimes yes. A lot of people have the perception that they can invest themselves. They can, but what they might make the mistake of is not understanding the underlying risk of the investment. There's a big thing at the moment, Sharesies and Hatch. They're investing in speculative investments like Tesla. They're putting all their money in individual companies, or they're putting it in very volatile index funds that could go down by 50%, and they're not necessarily ready for it. But if you go to an advisor without the knowledge of investing and why that recommendation is good or bad, then you could still go down a road that's not necessarily good for you. But usually advisors that make recommendations, if they go wrong, they don't have a license. So if they've been around a little while, then that gives you a bit of support. But the main thing is with insurance and mortgage, it's not costing you anything. They're thinking about things that are going to be worthwhile. You're just going to make sure they're not recommending things just because they're making money from it. An investment advisor, well, you might want to make the investments, but there's a lot of examples where people have made mistakes. So if you want to use a specialist that understands it and you understand it enough to make sure you're not going to get ripped off or put in a bad position, then it's quite helpful. But there are people that can definitely do it themselves, and there are people that think they can do it themselves but definitely can't, and there are some advisors that make recommendations that aren't right for people. So still know enough to not get yourself in a position that's bad, but it is worthwhile talking to an advisor for the most part. Even if you don't have a whole lot of money, they can always say no, or they might get commission from the underlying provider, so you don't have to worry about it. Now, final question. How do I choose a financial advisor in New Zealand? So funnily enough, I'm going to make a recommendation that's not me. So you look for Financial Advice New Zealand. It has a list of all the different advisors. You also have a financial service provider. So if you go FSPR, type it in Google, then search an individual's name or a company, you can see what they're able to give advice on. You can see what their potential conflicts of interest might be, and you can see if they're qualified to give the advice that they give. But if you go to Financial Advice New Zealand, you have a look at it and you're like, which kind of advisor do I need? Well, they have different categories. If you're trying to transfer your UK pension over, transfer your Australian super, if you're trying to invest in kiwis, retirement planning, insurance, mortgages, it's all on there. But one thing that will just differentiate between the others, and it's called the Certified Financial Planner. There's a higher level of criteria to achieve that. There's a higher ongoing training requirement to make sure that you maintain it, and it's an international standard. So if you look for the word CFP, it's usually like a little blue logo that will go underneath the advisor's name. That will suggest that, hey, that advisor has a good understanding, could look at the holistic approach, and is pretty qualified. But once again, make sure knowledge is power. Don't give the power to someone else. But if you understand it, a specialist can do a lot more for you. There's no point putting like a square peg in a round hole. When you have a really good talent, why don't you outsource the things you don't want to learn or you're not necessarily good at?